All right, so for this video, I just kind of wanted to talk about like I think the title of this video is going to be something along the lines of like the biggest mistake for lucid dreaming, and like I've made a video about this subject before, but I feel like it's really important to talk about because this is like the biggest trap in lucid dreaming, and what this trap is basically technique hopping, which basically means that whenever people get into the subject of lucid dreaming, what ends up happening is that they end up looking at techniques for lucid dreaming, and what they do is, first of all, you have like the misinformation out there, like, where people promise instant results, and that combined with like the obsession with like finding like the magic lucid dream technique. What you have is you have this big time, like the biggest time waster, the biggest trap, at least for me, and I believe just in general for lucid dreaming, is technique hopping, where people what people do is they'll try one technique for like a couple of days, or they'll try it for a week, and then they'll switch immediately to another technique, into another technique, into another, and it's just this big sort of Ouroboros that where they get extremely mid at a bunch of techniques instead of getting really good at one technique. And for you to get lucid for the rest of your life, like the objective is to become very good at one technique. If you have one solid technique and you're extremely good at that, that's going to give you the lifelong lucid dreams that you're looking for, rather than technique hopping. And this is something that I wasted so much of my time on, was switching from technique to technique to technique, just over and over and over again. And here's the thing, I got better at lucid dreaming as time went on, but I don't think I got good, anywhere near as good as I could have gotten if I focused on just one solid technique. If it's a good technique and what you're doing makes sense, then sticking with one technique can actually give you way more results, and you'll progress more in your practice in the same amount of time than someone who technique hops all the time, right? Like they're lily padding from technique to technique, right? They're sort of bunny hopping from method to method instead of sticking with just one. And another thing that I want to talk about is that even if you eventually lock into one technique, right, you can still fall into the technique hopping trap, because what can happen is that you might lock into like a single technique, but what'll happen is that you'll still be doing some amount of trial and error, because you'll be like, oh, okay, I did this technique and it worked and I got lucid one night. So you might say that, oh, okay, this technique works, but I still don't know exactly what makes it work, and so you might spend a period of time doing trial and error, trying to find, like, okay, if I focus on this aspect of the technique, how good is this at getting me lucid, and that's okay, but that's still a technique hopping trap that you can fall into, because even if you hone in on a singular technique, you can still fall into the trap of doing infinite variations of the single technique. And for lucid dreaming to work, right, you have to do the right thing in the right way, right? Which means that you have to find your technique of choice, and then you have to find what makes the technique work, and you have to do that, and you have to do a single thing only. And if you find out what makes the technique work, like, oh, I focused on this aspect, like for example, like after like about like a year and a half of like doing that technique hopping, what I did is I started focusing on like my stress ball technique, where I hold a stress ball in my left hand, and I maintain awareness of that as I fall asleep. That's my anchor, right? So after I honed in on that technique, I fell into the trap of doing infinite variations of the technique. Like one day I would do that stress ball technique, and I would focus on like trying to balance the anchor with imagery. And like another time I would like focus on trying to focus on the anchor really hard, or I would try to focus on like what I intended to do in the dream. But like so technically, like on paper, I was doing the same technique, but I was doing a bunch of variations of that technique. And eventually, what I found out is that the core stimulus for that stress ball technique is that if I focus on the stress ball up until the moment of transition, if I focus on that until I black out, basically, like if I just retain awareness all the way until I black out, then usually what will happen is I'll experience this jump cut or this blackout where I'll black out and then the dream will start, and then 5 seconds after the dream starts, I become lucid, right? And so after I found that core stimulus, I still sort of technique hopped for a while because I was looking for instant results. But once you find that, so even if you hone in on a single technique, you can still fall for this trap of technique hopping. And so this is like a really important subject because I think this is like the biggest time waster, the biggest trap is trying out infinite techniques, and then even if you lock in on a single technique, trying infinite variations of that technique. But once you find the right technique and you find out what makes the technique work, you need to lock in on doing the exact same thing every single night, even if you don't get lucid for a couple of nights, even if you don't get lucid for 2-3 days or maybe even a week or something. Like, if it worked once, if it worked a couple of times, if it worked 3 times before, like, oh, okay, if I focus on this aspect of my technique, then that tends to get me lucid. You need to focus on that and don't change anything. Don't breathe on it. Don't touch it, and just focus on that singular way of doing it. Because once you find the right thing, like, yet again, you're doing the right thing in the right way. And once you find that, you have to repeatedly do that exact same thing in order to program your brain, program your neural pathways, in order to actually fit into, in order for it to become second nature, in order for your brain to get used to it so much that becoming lucid is second nature. It's muscle memory. So I just wanted to make a video about that because I think that is like a huge trap that people fall into with lucid dreaming. That's a huge thing that people waste so much of their time on. And if people just focused on a single technique and they focused on a single area of focus, they focused on a single way of doing the technique, where it's like they do the technique and they focus on a single way. Like, for example, let's say like you do mild and you focus on visualize, and for some reason visualizing yourself becoming lucid works for your brain, then you need to focus on that. You need to focus on mild, and you need to focus on the visualization aspect. If that's what made it work, then that's the thing that you need to focus on, and don't deviate from it. Stay on the straight and narrow, and eventually what will happen is that you will get you will get more lucid dreams, and you'll get more lucid dreams easier because you're activating that same set of neural pathways, even if it doesn't look like you're succeeding, even if it doesn't look like you're exactly progressing. Because, like, yet again, like you might have like 2 or 3 days where you might have like a little dry spell, but even then, if you fire off that same set of neural pathways, you're going to get more lucid dreams than someone who's like constantly technique hopping. And I just yet again, I just wanted to sort of warn that, like, technique hopping is not just the trap that deals with different techniques. It's a trap that you can fall into even if you try doing the same technique. If you do infinite variations of that same technique, that's also another trap. That's also another time waster. So I just really want to make a video about that. But yeah, that's the video.